Two things scientists agree on. One, nothing lives inside an active volcano. The heat alone is enough to sterilize anything organic within seconds. Two, nothing lives at 2,000 meters below the surface of the ocean. Not in that kind of pressure. Not in that kind of dark. So, when a research submersible descended into the mouth of an underwater volcano 2 kilometers down and found something living inside it, nobody had a framework for what they were looking at. And here's the part that should bother you. That finding was never fully released to the public. Let's establish where we are, because without understanding the environment, you can't understand why this discovery is so disorienting. The volcano in question sits in the Pacific Ocean. It rises from the seafloor, but its summit never breaks the surface. It lives entirely underwater, 2,000 meters below sea level. That's roughly the height of the Swiss Alps, except inverted, pressing down on everything inside it. At that depth, the pressure is approximately 200 times what you feel standing on land right now. Your lungs would collapse in under a second without a pressurized vessel around you. The water temperature near the volcanic vents at the summit reaches upward of 200 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than your oven at full heat, and in a normal environment it would boil the water around it. But down here, the pressure is so extreme that the water stays liquid even at those temperatures. It becomes what scientists call superheated liquid, a state of matter that barely exists in textbooks. There is also almost no light. Not dim, none. Photosynthesis stops. Every food chain we understand begins with the sun. None of that applies here. This is, by every accepted definition of the word, a dead zone. So, when a submersible dropped into the caldera, the mouth of the volcano itself, and the cameras came on, what they recorded broke 3 separate models of how we understand life. Here's what the dive footage shows. The submersible descends through the volcanic cone. The walls around it are active. You can see the shimmering of superheated water rising from the rock. Visibility is low. The pilot is navigating on sonar because the water itself distorts everything. And then, in the caldera floor, movement. Not one organism, multiple. The initial camera pass picks up what appear to be sharks. Not deep-water sharks drifting near the rim. Sharks inside the active volcanic structure, moving with purpose, not in distress. But that's not even the most disorienting part. Further in, closer to the vent structures themselves, the researchers documented microbial mats so dense, so structurally complex, that one scientist later described them as looking more like a city than a colony. Thick, layered biological structures built directly onto superheated rock, not clinging to the edge of survivable conditions, thriving inside what should be the lethality zone. And beneath those mats, and this is where the data gets complicated, chemical signatures that don't match any known biological process. Not chemosynthesis, not photosynthesis, not any metabolic pathway that has been formally identified and named. The team took samples. They logged the footage. And then the volcano did what volcanoes do. It erupted. Not catastrophically, but enough. The submersible had to ascend. The dive was over. What they came back with was the most scientifically significant biological sample from a deep-sea discovery in the last 2 decades. And it sat in a lab for years before any of it was published. Before we get into what the analysis found and why the full report still hasn't seen daylight, if you've watched this far, there's a decent chance you're the kind of person who actually wants to know how the ocean works. Hit subscribe. We go here a lot. Let's talk about what makes this biologically impossible, so you understand the weight of what was found. Everything alive on this planet, everything relies on one of 2 energy sources: sunlight or chemical reactions near hydrothermal vents. The vent-based life was only confirmed in 1977. Before that, science was certain. Without sunlight, there could be no food chain. The deep sea taught us we were wrong about that, but even vent-based life operates in a specific range. Too hot. The proteins that make up living cells simply unravel. Scientists call this denaturing. It's irreversible. It's not like frostbite where things can recover. Above roughly 120 degrees Celsius, organic molecules stop functioning as life. except some don't. There is a class of microorganism called hyperthermophiles. They don't just tolerate extreme heat, they require it. The most resilient confirmed example, Methanopyrus condleri, has been documented surviving at 122 degrees Celsius. That's the current record. That's the edge of what we believe is possible. What the samples from this volcanic caldera suggested is that something was metabolizing, actively converting energy, actively reproducing, at temperatures significantly above that threshold. If confirmed, it doesn't just add a species to a list. It forces a rewrite of the chapter on what life is, which, incidentally, has significant implications for astrobiology, the search for life on other planets. Because Europa, Jupiter's moon, has a liquid ocean beneath its ice shell, with hydrothermal activity at the floor, with no sunlight whatsoever. If life can survive inside an active underwater volcano at 2,000 meters depth on Earth, the probability map for where else it might exist changes dramatically. That's not a fringe idea. That's a conversation that was actively happening in the research team's internal correspondence, some of which has since been obtained through academic record requests. So why isn't this on the front page of every science journal? The honest answer is, it partially is. Some of the findings have been published in narrow technical form, in journals most people will never read, with language deliberately hedged. The microbial mats are mentioned. The chemical signatures are noted as anomalous. The temperature tolerances are described as requiring further verification. What hasn't been released is the full video footage from the dive. What hasn't been released is the complete genomic sequencing data from the biological samples. What hasn't been released is the internal analysis document, which we know exists because it was referenced in a published paper's footnotes and then quietly removed in a subsequent correction. Why? There are a few explanations, and they're not mutually exclusive. The first is institutional caution. Science is slow by design. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The researchers may simply be waiting for replication, for another expedition to go back, take fresh samples, and confirm what the first dive found. The volcano has been periodically active, which makes re-entry dangerous and expensive. Funding is finite. Peer review takes time. The second explanation is more interesting. Some of the organisms recovered appear to have properties, biological structures, that have potential applications in materials science and pharmaceutical development. It's not unprecedented for research with commercial implications to move through institutional and intellectual property review before full academic publication. That process can take years. The third explanation, and I'm not endorsing this, I'm reporting what's in the academic community conversations, is that the chemical signatures found in those samples don't fit neatly into either a terrestrial or non-terrestrial origin story. And if the data is ambiguous enough, releasing it prematurely creates a problem that's worse than holding it. It creates a public narrative before science has the tools to responsibly manage what that narrative means. That's not a conspiracy. That's the most human thing in the world. Nobody wants to be the team that announced we found alien life and then had to walk it back. Here's where we actually land. We know life exists inside that volcano. That part is confirmed. The sharks alone are documented. The microbial communities are documented. Those findings alone rewrote how we think about survivability in extreme environments. What is still open, genuinely open, not rhetorically open, is the question of what exactly was metabolizing near those vents. What the chemical signatures mean, whether we're looking at a new branch on the tree of life, or whether we're looking at something that forces us to redraw the tree entirely. And there's this. If life evolved independently, or differently, inside a volcanic system with no connection to the surface biosphere, then the origin of life question gets a lot more complicated. One of the leading theories for how life began on Earth involves underwater volcanic activity, hydrothermal systems as the cradle of the first self-replicating molecules. If we're finding life now that operates by different rules in those same conditions, that's not just an interesting footnote. That's a window. The expedition team is scheduled for a return dive. The funding is confirmed. The submersible has been modified to collect better samples at higher temperatures. What they come back with, if they publish it in full, could be one of the most significant biological discoveries in human history. or it could raise more questions than it answers, which honestly is usually how this goes. 2,000 meters down, inside an active volcano, organisms that shouldn't survive, surviving, data that should be public, sitting in a lab. The ocean covers 71% of this planet. We've mapped less than 25% of the seafloor. Whatever's down there, we're still at the beginning of finding out. If this kind of thing is what you're here for, the next video is for you. It covers the trench system that connects directly to the volcanic field we talked about today, and what's been found along that ridge that the first expedition wasn't even looking for. I'll see you there.